Top of the morning and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. One person killed and another wounded after shells hit residential building in Donetsk. Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu visits missile production facility, says output has increased several-fold. Plus, plans for Poland's first nuclear power plant move ahead. Thank you for joining us. One person is dead and at least one other was seriously injured after artillery fire hit a residential building in Russian-controlled Ukrainian city of Donetsk on Wednesday. Shells struck the residential building in the west of Donetsk city at about 9 a.m. local time, badly damaging it. A married couple lived in one of the apartments on the third floor, and the husband was buried under the rubble. He died a few hours later in hospital from his injuries. The man's wife was seriously wounded with multiple bone fractures. The city of Donetsk has been under Russian control since 2014, but Ukrainian troops continue to hold positions on its outskirts, and the city regularly comes under artillery fire. Russian-installed authorities accuse Ukraine of targeting civilian objects and infrastructure. After his visit to a missile production facility in Moscow region, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu is advertising that tactical missile production in the country has increased several-fold. Several Russian officials, including Shoigu and President Vladimir Putin, have said that Russia has increased volumes of its missile and overall military production, but have not disclosed exact numbers. It seems Black Sea Fleet Commander Viktor Sokolov's image is appearing everywhere. A television station run by Russia's defense ministry showed a video in which he was being interviewed on Wednesday, days after Ukraine claimed he had been killed in a missile strike on Russian Navy headquarters in Crimea. In the video, Mr. Sokolov says the Black Sea Fleet is performing successfully, but it's unclear from his statements whether the clip was filmed after Ukraine's missile strike on September 22nd or before. According to the Defense Ministry, the video released on September the 27th shows Mr. Admiral Sokolov at an award event congratulating members of the Black Sea Fleet soccer team for their performance in a football tournament for teams from Russia's armed forces, which ended on September the 18th. A television reporter points out to Admiral Sokolov that the awards event in Sevastopol had been postponed because of known events in the port city, a possible reference to Ukraine's missile strike. Mr. Sokolov responded by saying the award ceremony had been postponed for another reason. In his words, "We were busy and had to postpone it for a few days." Moscow and Havana are in contact after Cuba made arrests over the alleged trafficking of its citizens to fight for Russia's forces in Ukraine. That's according to the Russian ambassador. Earlier this month, Cuba announced the arrest of 17 people linked to a trafficking network that operates from Russia to recruit Cubans for military operations in Ukraine. Ambassador Victor Coronelli told journalists he does not know how many Cubans are involved. Amongst those arrested are 3 alleged recruiters and 14 Cubans accused of planning to go and fight for Russia in Ukraine. Soldiers fighting on Donetsk region front lines say Russian drones are the biggest fear of Ukraine's artillery. To protect the howitzer, they installed a net that has already saved them once from a Russian Lancet drone that spotted their position. The brigade has created its own laboratory where it prints drone parts on a 3D printer, filling them with explosives, making drop systems, and actively using them against fortified Russian positions. The Ukrainian government has named 3 new deputy defense ministers after 6 incumbents who are dismissed following the appointment of a new defense minister this month. The new deputy ministers include Yuri Zahiri, deputy finance minister in 2018 to 2020, Natalia Kalmykova, who most recently served as executive director of the Ukrainian Veteran Fund, and Katerina Chernohorenko, head of Ukraine's Army of Drones projects. And Ukraine scored devastating deep strikes against Russian-occupied Crimea in the 83rd week of the war, just as President Vladimir Zelensky was touring Europe and the United States and picking up pledges of new long-range weapons and financing. At the same time, Ukrainian and Western sources confirmed that Ukrainian troops have broken through the first and strongest line of Russian defense on the southern front, known as the Surovikin line, after the general who devised it. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry calculates that in total, since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, 479 aircraft, 250 helicopters, 7,191 unmanned aerial vehicles, 438 anti-aircraft missile systems, and over 12,000 tanks and other armored combat vehicles have been destroyed. The ministry also counts in the number of destroyed armaments about 1,000 combat vehicles of multiple launch rocket systems, over 6,000 field artillery guns and mortars, and also over 13,000 units of special military vehicles. And in news just coming in, Britain's new Defense Secretary Grant Shapps met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on a surprise visit to Ukraine. A meaningful meeting with Secretary of State for Defense Grant Shapps, according to President Zelensky on Telegram, in his words, "Thank you for your strong financial defense and humanitarian support for Ukraine. Our cooperation in the military sphere significantly enhances the capabilities of Ukrainian soldiers on the battlefield." It's unknown when exactly President Zelensky and Shapps met. Zelensky said about the meeting, which he posted on Telegram, that cooperation between both countries allows the Ukrainian army to significantly expand its capabilities on the battlefield, in particular by means of long-range weapons. The two also discussed bolstering Ukraine's air defenses, saying it's particularly important in the run-up to the winter season. Polish and U.S. officials have signed an agreement in Warsaw for the construction of Poland's first nuclear power plant, part of the effort by the Central European nation to move away from polluting fossil fuels. The Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, called the deal to build the plant at the Lubiatowa-Kopalino site on the Pomeriana region near the Baltic Sea, the beginning of a new chapter for Poland, and described nuclear energy as a stable and clean energy source. He says the only clean, stable energy source that is technologically proven and verified in terms of safety is nuclear energy, which is having its big day today. In his words, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its use of energy to put economic and political pressure on European nations added urgency to Poland's search for alternative energy sources. Moscow has accused the United Kingdom and the United States of involvement in the Ukrainian attack on the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet in Crimea, in Sevastopol. London and Washington have long supported the criminal regime of Kyiv, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova at a news conference in Moscow. The attack on September the 22nd was carried out without the slightest doubt with the help of the U.S. and British secret services. Western reconnaissance data, satellites of NATO countries, and spy planes were used, according to Zakharova. The obvious aim of such terrorist acts, in their words, is to divert attention from the failed attempt on the counteroffensive by the Ukrainian armed forces and to frighten people to stir up panic in society. And after the break, Poland's Minister of Agriculture, Robert Telus, says grain talks with Ukraine are on track. Welcome to the sophomore stretch of today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, the Polish Agriculture Minister Robert Telus says talks with Ukraine about grain imports are on track. This follows the dispute between both countries over Warsaw's decision to extend a ban on export of produce. At a news conference after an online meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart, Mykola Solsky, Mr. Robert Telus also reiterated Warsaw's demand that Ukraine should withdraw a complaint made against Poland at the World Trade Organization. He added that Poland is in the final stages of talks with Lithuania about organizing transit of Ukrainian grains to ports there. Kiev's relations with Warsaw have soured since Poland, along with Hungary and Slovakia, decided to extend the ban that was introduced to protect farmers from a surge in grain and food import from Ukraine after Russia invaded the country. The government in Warsaw, which has been one of Kiev's staunchest allies, is also under pressure from the far right to take a tougher stance on Ukraine ahead of the October 15th elections. Now, Moscow has accused, before we go to that story, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has apologized after the former Speaker of the House of Commons praised a Nazi veteran during a session where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was present. Mr. Trudeau said he was particularly sorry about the predicament this had put President Zelensky in. Now, Russia says the incident backs up its assertion that the war in Ukraine aims to denazify the country, a charge Kiev and Western allies says is baseless. The Speaker, Anthony Rota, who publicly acknowledged the veteran in the House on September the 22nd and even called him a hero, resigned on Tuesday, acknowledging sole responsibility for what had happened.
In a few moments, I will address the House in front of all Canadians, in front of Jewish people here and around the world, and Ukrainians, to offer Parliament's unreserved apologies for what happened on Friday. The Speaker was solely responsible for the invitation and recognition of this man and has wholly accepted that responsibility and stepped down. This was a mistake that has deeply embarrassed Parliament and Canada. All of us who were in this House on Friday regret deeply having stood and clapped, even though we did so unaware of the context. It was a horrendous violation of the memory of the millions of people who died in the Holocaust, and it was deeply, deeply painful for Jewish people. It also hurt Polish people, Roma people, 2S LGBTQI+ people, disabled people, racialized people, and the many millions who were targeted by the Nazi genocide. Every year, there are fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors to share firsthand the horrors of what they experienced, and it is therefore incumbent upon us all to ensure that no one ever forgets what happened. I also want to reiterate how deeply sorry Canada is for the situation this put President Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation in. It is extremely troubling to think that this egregious error is being politicized by Russia and its supporters to provide false propaganda about what Ukraine is fighting for. Friday's joint session was about what Canada stands for, about our steadfast support of Ukraine's fight against Putin's brutality, lies, and violence. It was a moment to celebrate and acknowledge the sacrifices of Ukrainians as they fight for their democracy, their freedom, their language and culture, and for peace. This is the side Canada was on in World War II, and this is the side we are on today.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We now bring in to comment on the developments in the war, military strategist, and a former commander of 4 Mechanized Brigade, Benin City, Major General Pat Akam Winger. He joins us from our Abuja studios. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Thanks, Olumide.
Before we go to the war proper, would you want to comment on the apology of the Canadian Prime Minister, which followed the resignation of the Speaker of the House of Commons, Anthony Rota, because of honoring former Nazi personnel of World War II by the House of Commons in Canada?
Yeah, I think it was a mistake. It was an error that shouldn't have been committed. Before you invite people of that nature, you do a background check to see whether they fit into the narrative you want to drive. So I think it was a grave error, and the Canadian Prime Minister was right in apologizing in an era where apologies are very rare. So I think it's a welcome development. Of course, obviously Russia has pounced on it and is driving a narrative that his war is justified because they are fighting the Nazis in Ukraine. It's surprising because, you see, the Ukrainian president is Jewish by nature, by extraction. So that narrative appears absurd, but then in war, everything is used. So, okay, that narrative is being driven by Russia, and it looks like a gift to them. But again, the Canadian Prime Minister has apologized, and the Speaker has resigned. I think the world should move beyond that now.
Russia has gone out of its way to a certain degree to show that Admiral Viktor Sokolov, who purportedly died in that attack on the Black Sea Fleet Command Headquarters in Crimea, is still alive. And they showed him presenting awards to a football team. Nothing to see here, water off a duck's back. But was this strike against this fleet important enough in the war to cause a reciprocal action from Russia that will not go in favor of Ukraine?
Yeah, the strike was strategic. Apart from the fact that is a very major war coordinating center, it also drives the logistics. And then to be able to have access to the kind of intelligence that made that possible will make Russia to pause and calculate. So it was strategic. It was operationally rewarding and strategically rewarding. Again, whether the man is dead or not, the fact that they were able to hit such a headquarters will give some kind of added impetus to what they are doing. You will recall, if you followed, you will see that they sent in a lot of drones, that cheap drones that served as a diversion, and then sent in the missiles. So while the Russians were trying to tackle the drones that were coming in, very cheap drones that were coming in, the missiles landed. It will make Russia to pause and to recalibrate and say, well, if these guys are able to pull off these kind of things, what do we do next? And then it also has a psychological effect. The inhabitants of Crimea will start thinking, are we safe? So that's the idea. In this kind of war, from the perspective of Ukraine, targets are very few. So when you see a fleeting target of that nature, you take it.
Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova says they didn't do it alone. They had the help of the UK and the US. What sort of dimension does this bring to the conflict?
Well, Olumide, nothing has strategically changed. We've known for a long while that this kind of support has been coming. You will recall that before the war was launched, every move by the Russians appeared to be just dropped in the open by the Americans. The Americans were just telling the Ukrainians, this war is going to happen. Even though Ukraine kept saying, no, it was not going to take place, there you see that the Americans were just getting concrete, solid intelligence and dropping them in the public domain. it looks like a prosaic thing, but so if you are supporting Ukraine and you are giving a lot of resources, you are giving in hardware, you are giving in even money, you are supporting them fully the way within NATO, and the Americans and NATO are supporting the Ukrainians. Passing this kind of information to them will become normal. It looks normal, even though nobody will accept that it was passed. But that thing was pulled up with the level of intelligence that was required. I don't think the Ukrainians would have done that on their own. I think they had support. So it doesn't change anything dramatically. Russia has always known that Americans, the British, and the rest are supporting Ukraine. It doesn't change anything dramatically. Russia appears not to have too many targets to hit now. They've hit so many targets that reactions, whether the Ukrainians were able to hit Russia at the time they did or not, Russia attacks anytime it wants because it has missiles. It attacks anytime it wants. So it doesn't change anything dramatically in my view.
Will the arrival of the Abrams tanks from the United States and the promised arrival of ATM CS, I think, long-range missiles from the United States, further compound Russia's problems?
Yeah, except that the Americans are giving the army attack missiles, but the kind of munition they are attaching to it does not go too far enough. They are being careful not to provide Ukraine with the kind of access that will make them hit the homeland, the Russian homeland. So yes, it will help. And Abrams, for now, appears arguably the best tank in the field. So if you marry it very well with complements of infantry, the artillery, if you tax-organize them in a way that give that kind of advantage we expect, and you are able to break through like they are breaking through in some places, it will bring a lot to the table in the efforts to push the Russians back. And Russia, I don't know why Russia is not counter-attacking. They're just sitting and defending. And when you keep defending like that and trade the initiative to your enemy, and then the enemy gets this kind of access that they're getting, you are likely to suffer some casualties, and it's going to happen.
Yeah, you pointed that out. Now I'm thinking, is this the calm before the storm? Because you're quite correct. It seems as though Russia is just defending. And with the attack on the Black Sea Fleet headquarters, and we know that that's like their pride and joy in that area, they were not too vocal in condemning it. They did not make too much of a brouhaha over it. And it seems as though they may be planning something in retaliation. What do you think?
I think they've attacked Odessa already. But look at it this way. See, Russia has been fighting for a long while. They weren't expecting that this war will be going on the way, at the pace it's going on, and with this kind of duration it has covered so far. When you fight for this long, you suffer some kind of attrition, equipment, men, and all that. Even on the part of Ukraine, I'm not too sure they have so many troops again to be able to inject in. So I think that this war, to some extent, is frozen. There isn't much Russia can do. They've reintroduced the Wagner Group, but it hasn't changed anything dramatically. Is Russia going to adopt conscription to bring in new hands? If they do that, there will be a blowback, politically and otherwise, back home. So I think that this thing will go on. It will be a slugfest. It will go on for a while. I don't think there will be any dramatic changes. I don't think anybody is going to throw a blow that neutralizes the opponent. And I think it will ebb and flow until the weather changes and then it's frozen for a season for them to recalibrate, re-equip, introduce some kind of new energy and equipment, and then but nothing dramatically is going to happen that will change the trajectory of this war the way it is going. So I'm not expecting much. If Russia had anything to do, they would have done it by now. You know, you can't be fighting a nation like Ukraine and it drags on 2 years and you've not thrown a blow that you think would have ended it. I don't think Putin is comfortable with the way that this thing is going. If they had anything dramatic, they would have introduced it. I don't think any new tactics and strategy may change the scenario the way we expect. I think it will continue like this.
Is Russia losing this war?
Well,
By
if
inference.
you view it against the backdrop of fighting a small nation and struggling with that small nation, you can throw that in and say, well, look, I mean, if see, there is a biblical scripture that says, there's a scripture that says, if you run with human beings and you can't keep pace, how will you run with horses? I mean, if you are fighting a small nation like this and you are struggling like this, supposing you were taking on NATO, how would you perform? So if you look at it from that perspective, yeah. But to say Russia is prepared to fight and to wait, it's a long game. And you see the events of the past week have given them some hope. Poland came in suddenly and threw some spanner in the wheels by saying, no, we are no longer going to supply Ukraine with some weapons. And then some development back in America where the Republicans are saying we will no longer accept giving money to Ukraine, funding the war. So Russia is playing a long game. They'll wait to see whether political terrains across the landscape of those nations that are supporting Ukraine will change and become favorable. If that happens, Russia wins. Russia is a big country. They will play the long game. They have access to resources. They are still selling oil. They have friends that can supply things. So Russia will play a long game. If it plays on longer, Ukraine is disadvantaged because if somebody is supporting a war, to how long can they support it? So yeah, to say Russia is losing, well, if you look at it from the perspective of them being a big nation and struggling with a small nation, yeah, but in the long run, Russia is playing a long game, and the more it drags on, the more nations get tired of supporting Ukraine, the better for Russia.
So using this sporting analogy, it's more of a marathon now than a sprint.
Yeah, it has become a marathon. This thing will go on for long. Okay, look at it this way. America entered into Iraq with shock and awe. They bombed everything that was bombable, if you use that expression. And then you needed to occupy the ground, and that was when the insurgency started. It was expected that this was going to be an insurgency. The way the Russians prepared the war, they were supposed to be occupying Ukraine now. And then the Ukrainians would have been fighting like an insurgency, disrupting them and killing them and all that. But it didn't play out that way. So what do? The long game. Just keep on fighting. Keep on fighting until those supporting Ukraine get tired, or you just drag it on like forever. And some wars start like this and they last for 15 years. So this is going to be a marathon.
In your view, militarily speaking, is this counteroffensive as being plotted and deployed by Ukraine the best strategy they could have employed?
Well, given the kind of hands they've been given to play, is the best they can do. See, these guys are fighting without a notable air force. So if you do not have air cover, your infantry and tanks are exposed, your artillery exposed, and then you do not have long-range missiles or weapons to hit the enemy from afar off, to hit them behind the enemy lines and disrupt their logistics and planning processes. So what do? You have to go the way that your land is occupied. You need to take it back. So you take the fight to the enemy, but you are fighting without the assets that otherwise you would have had to be competitive in war. So it is the best hand, is the best they can play with the hand they have been dealt. So yeah, and because it was telegraphed, Russia has prepared defenses in depth. So many trenches, dragon teeth. It's difficult to navigate. But even then, with that, Ukraine is still making progress. They've broken the first line. We'll wait to see whether they make any headway going forward.
How important do you think, therefore, is the United States' support for the war continuously because of the threat of the government shutdown over the withholding of funds by the U.S. Congress by certain members of the Republican Party?
Well, government shutdowns in America do not last for too long. I think in the end, Senate heads will prevail. But again, it portends grave danger to the war effort. If Congress, controlled by the Republicans, keeps saying we will not fund, okay, yesterday the Senate passed a stopgap funding that if the House of Reps had taken it up, would have scaled through and then it would have averted the government shutdown. Some elements from the right say they were not going to vote for it. And the Republican House majority is only 4 members. So any few that say we will not vote will cripple it. So basically, Ukraine will be praying that the political terrain in America continues to favor them, that Biden will win re-election, that the Democrats will take over the House and retain the Senate, so that for the next 4 years, or I mean 2 years at least, the war can be fought with support from America. But you know, Congress has the power of the purse, and is controlled by Republicans, and they are not open to just throwing in resources like that to Ukraine. So those are the challenges.
And just as the support for Ukraine from its allies is key in maintaining its counteroffensive, how much of an impact do you think has the Iranian support for Russia helped them in their prosecution of their war, and allegations that China may have been surreptitiously supplying them with some form of weapons, and now their alliance with North Korea?
The Iranian drones have been very devastating. They've been used against Ukraine for a long while now. But again, the support of, I think that China is being very careful. If they've been supporting, it will be very minimal. China is being very, very careful. It does not want to throw in too much into this. They offer support openly, but to say you transfer weapons that the Americans will get to see, because nothing is hidden at that level, I think that, yeah, they can get support from North Korea, but again, to travel across the Siberian line with heavy weapons, not weapons, munitions, artillery munitions, 152 mm, 155 mm ammunition. What quantity can you give that will change the trajectory of the battle? I don't think it will make any significant change or difference.
So Russia, therefore, doesn't have as many friends as Ukraine does. Neither does it have as many nations helping it with supply of weapons. Are the odds beginning to stack themselves against Russia?
They have friends, but the kind of friends they have are not willing to throw their hearts into the ring. You look at the BRICS. India is there, Brazil, South Africa. What can those ones bring to the table? India buys weapons from Russia. Are you going to return them back? The several $billion missile defense shield that India and Turkey bought was penetrated by Ukrainians. So India will be thinking back, did we get value for money? So if you're the one, will you go back throwing in support? Now they're asking questions. This was supposed to be one of the top ranges of defense, missile defense shields. The Ukrainians were able to penetrate it and hit that's fleet headquarters. So will India be prepared? India doesn't want to play that kind of game. They will support you, but not providing weapons. So I don't think they have friends, but the friends are not strong enough or willing to bring much to the table.
Is there a danger now, then, that if it gets worse for the Russians and they can't meet their targets, and possibly there's a development that seems to escalate the chances of them being embarrassed and losing the war, that they will actually deploy their nuclear weapons in Belarus, the tactical nuclear weapons. Is there any sliver of a chance that will happen?
If Russia deploys those tactical missiles, nuclear weapons in war, the price will be stiff. They will pay a price. You see, to introduce that is to permit the West to also give the Ukrainians the wherewithal to introduce them. So it will become, nobody benefits from that. And I do not, on present level, I do not think that Russia will get that kind of embarrassment. See, the Russian forces are occupying critical areas. They've been fighting. Ukraine has not been able to get the kind of weapons that will hit them where it hurts most. So if nothing dramatically changes, if Ukrainians are not introducing long-range missiles that will hit the homeland in critical places, this war will continue on this level and on this scale for a while. And like I said, Russia is playing the long game. And nobody casually introduces tactical weapons, nuclear weapons like that. So I think saner heads will prevail. I don't think Russia will be embarrassed to the extent that they do that. But again, I must also drop the hint, the broad hint, that anything and anything is possible in war.
But sir, you know that the Ukrainians have been getting the weapons they've been promised. They asked for Leopard tanks, they got them. They asked for cluster munitions, they prepared for it, they got them. Uranium-depleted munitions, they have them now, or it's on the way. The Abrams tanks, they have them. The Storm Shadow missiles, they have them as well. So what will it take? What will it take? Because especially concerning the cluster munitions, if you remember, it was touted to be such a dangerous undertaking that it will possibly it'll dislodge the Russians from their positions on the front line as soon as they start to use them. Well, we've not heard anything about it thus far.
This war is difficult. See, the terrain is wide. The defenses are stiff. I mean, I need to get close to you to be able to throw a punch. But if you laid out defenses that I need to navigate first before I get close to you. So unless you mount those cluster munitions on weapons that are able to hit far and wide, you need for now they need to get close to be able to deploy them. And the way the Russian defenses have been laid out, you can't get close enough to be able to inflict the kind of damage they would have wanted to inflict. So yes, but you know, you drove on something. Every time we get to a level where we think the Americans and NATO will not cross, they cross it. There were a lot of red lines that were drawn that we thought they would not be able to cross them. They crossed them. So going forward, is it possible that in the end, the Americans will actually provide them with the kind of weapons that will help them hit the Russian homeland? We are gradually edging towards that, because everything Russia said should not be done that will change the narrative, that will signal a crossing of some red lines, that will make them do some things, has been done, and nothing really has happened. So yeah, we're heading to where maybe some things that the Americans are thinking they will not provide will end up being provided. Nobody thought the Abrams tanks were going to be provided, they got provided. So like you said, yeah, we're heading there. This war will dramatically change if Ukraine is able to hit the Russian homeland the way they want. Then you will see, you will know that, yeah, something has changed. The Russians too will begin to do some things that otherwise they wouldn't have done.
If they hit the Russian homeland, then does that make it a third world war? Russia will begin to use those tactical nuclear weapons or do something more devastating?
Right now, they'll be able to hit Russian homeland to some scale. But if you have weapons that are missiles, that are long range, that are able to hit Moscow repeatedly with devastating effects, that unsettles the populace, then it means the war has gone to a certain level. See, you see, war is dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, you can start a war, but you can't tell how it goes and how it ends. So are we going to get to the level where other nations will get involved? Not very likely, but again, you can't rule out anything.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, but we hope we can rule out, at the end of the day, a worsening of this situation. That's our hope and our prayer. And we thank you so much for your time, your insight, and your views this morning. Major General Pat Akam Winger,
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Limited. Thanks.
When we return, England among nations refusing to play against Russian under-17 teams. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome to the final stretch of today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine, where Binance is selling its Russian oil operations. And to give us further information is Ini John Mecca, Channels Television business correspondent. Ini, good morning.
Good morning.
So they're jumping on the bandwagon of enterprises pulling the plug on operations in Russia. Is it going to be a gradual?
No.
Or
yeah, well, maybe it's going to be gradual, but it's total according to them.
Okay.
And it's, you know, we've been having a lot of conversation about what cryptocurrency and Binance and all of that doing. At one time they stopped the peer-to-peer trade. They blocked that, you know, because they noticed that, of course, a lot of Russians had jumped on cryptocurrency as a way to avoid the sanction. And then there was the ban of no rubles trading on cryptocurrency.
Right.
And then they moved, and then they moved to, well, no rubles, no dollar, no euro from Russia on Binance. And then, of course, the residents now move to other currencies. It's just a matter of exchange, and then you get that. But now there's a hammer from the US hanging over Binance to say that they are supporting the war, you know, because, of course, they are still allowing a lot of transactions, and it seems that that is encouraging revenue and movement of money and trade and all of that. So that's why Binance is going out. And, you know, just when they were going to make this announcement, then there's a buyer, they call them Comnex. You know, they're like a new crypto community that said they will buy Binance in Russia over, you know. So they haven't done it yet, but it's something that obviously they're going to do, and they say they're determined, because I think no country wants to be caught up in the middle of sanctions.
And Binance will not sell that for $1.
They would sell it, but no, what was that company that sold theirs for
I forget.
Exactly.
For $1.
That's for $1. You know, but they said it was not just any, it was a memorial $1 that was staying in history for a bit. You know, so there's been a lot of things going on. Just in April, Russia was termed the country with the largest mining of the cryptocurrency coins.
Okay.
So, you know, it's like a sharp transition, going from a really boom that's going on in Russia, to just leaving the country. But obviously they have done the calculations to see that if that sanction was to come on them, it would be bigger, you know, it would cost them more than what they are gaining at the moment. So I guess they just decided to go with it and pay for it in a smaller way in the nearer future.
Will it affect the Russians significantly? Or it doesn't really?
Well, it will only affect, like, I think mostly the young ones. The big businesses are not doing business on cryptocurrency. Right. They have found other ways, you know, to go around their trade. That's the oil and gas. You know, mostly they're not there, you know, so it's more of the other transactions. And you can imagine the group of individuals that are captured in that sector, that's in the cryptocurrency sector. I know that they had up to, at one point, 300,000 euros in trade. So it's not like that's insignificant, but it's not the core of a Russian economy. And
the landscape will further change now with Gazprom buying shopping centers of Sweden in Russia.
Yeah, you know, Gazprom Bank, we know them as they are the major bank for the oil and gas of it's privately owned, but I mean, sometimes you just forget that because they are so involved in Russia's national trade, especially oil and gas. So you wonder how they now get into buying shopping malls. But obviously, of course, IKA is owned by Sweden. They do have, I think they even have in Nigeria, right here in Abuja. They have, it's a very big shopping mall. So is this diversification? Is this because of a threat of drop in revenue of oil and gas? Is that why we are seeing Gazprom? Because Gazprom is a really big bank dealing with countries, you know. So are they going to now start getting involved in running shopping malls? But anyway, the 14 shopping malls they're buying in Russia, they're very large ones and all of that. It's just the thought of a bank like Gazprom, which has been dealing with oil and gas and huge revenues and inter-countries, is like almost a national bank at this time, you know, getting involved in the administration and the running of shopping mall. But who knows? It might be they're doing it on behalf of the governments. You know what I'm saying? You know,
it won't be
Russia.
Unrelated to the Swedes, the Swedish, who are not on as good terms as they used to be with Russia.
Yeah, well, yeah, perhaps IKA was just looking for a way to leave Russia, just like other countries, just like, you know, we're talking about Binance now. And the most available avenue was Gazprom because they have the money, so they can afford it. At this time, you don't have a lot of big names like that in Russia who want to risk investment, you know, in the country. And that's why I think perhaps the government hand is somewhere behind, because people are looking for how to reduce their risk in Russia now because of the sentiment around it. So why would you invest so much money, and they bought it for millions of dollars, beg your pardon, you know, so why would they risk, you know, putting so much money in a country at this time that has a lot of negative sentiment around it? Maybe
they're just putting their money where their mouth is. Ini, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Ini John Merker, Channels Television business correspondent. And now Central European foreign ministers have met in Vienna to discuss migration controls and the Western Balkans' accession to the European Union. Now, Austrian Foreign Minister Alexander Schallenberg called for a review of the Schengen system, while Hungary's Peter Szijjártó affirmed that Budapest will reject any migratory pressure from Europe, on Europe, that is. Schallenberg and Slovenia's Tanja Fajon also reiterated calls for Western Balkans integration into the European Union and the region's need for a clearer perspective for EU membership. The foreign ministers of Austria, Slovenia, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia have been meeting in the so-called Central Fifth format since 2022, initially established to cooperate on matters related to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Suddenly a situation where two further Schengen countries have announced further border controls. That means by now a fourth of all Schengen members have border controls, encompassing 55% of all population among the Schengen countries. That shows that this system is not quite working as it should, and our position in Austria is we would like to have it to come back to the situation it was before.
Well, when it comes to the migration, we are faced with this challenge from the south. So we have to deal with that. That's our problem. When it comes to migratory pressure from the east, if there's any orchestrated action to put migratory pressure on Europe from any direction, we heavily reject that. We heavily reject that, and we are heavily against. So this position of ours is known, I think, very widely by the Russians as well, and this position has not changed, and if there's a will, I can express this position anytime.
It's extremely important, and countries in the region, to have a clear perspective that it is doable. It is doable if we have a political willingness. With all the hurdles on the side of the EU, with necessary reforms and adaptations, but also to push on the countries of the Balkans to do the necessary reforms and use the momentum, because I am afraid that with all the instabilities, we can risk another tension or a conflict in our region.
Finally, England has joined a host of other nations in refusing to play against Russian teams should they be readmitted to UEFA's under-17 competitions, which UEFA say they have been. The English FA voted against the motion raised at the Executive Committee in Limassol to work on a technical solution that will enable Russia's under-17 boys and girls teams to rejoin competitions despite the continuing invasion of Ukraine. UEFA President Alexander Safarin, who is understood to have brought the motion forward, believes it will be directly discriminating against Russian children if these teams are not readmitted. The Polish FA president also wrote on the platform X, "If Russian national teams are allowed to participate in the competition, our national teams will not compete with that team. This is the only right decision." And that's where we leave it for today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Thank you for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Have a good day.